What do you guys think? Is killing a goldfish tantamount to cold-blooded murder?
Yes, I would say so.
Oh,
I don't know if you're going to get charged for it, though.
no.
I feel like it's a moral crime, not a legal crime.
Exactly. Even in the streets of London, I suppose.
Hello, welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to its release and reception. We are doing existential thrillers this cycle. We have a special guest, Natasha. Introduce yourself. Tell us all about yourself and your background.
Thanks for joining us, Natasha.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha. I'm from Singapore. I'm a film editor and film critic here, which is, I received my Rotten Tomatoes accreditation last year. And
Amazing.
yeah, and I'm a school teacher as well. Yeah.
I love it. You're our second Rotten Tomato approved critic on the show.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic. We love it. It's like having royalty.
Oh, I I don't know how royal I am. I think it's like, when you get it, you're so excited because
Yeah.
it's like, wow, and then after
know.
that, you're like, okay, I guess this is
Right.
it.
Now what?
Yeah. What else is there to achieve, really? Tell us, so you're one of the editors at culturedvultures.com, is that correct?
Yes, correct. So basically, Cultured Vultures is this pop culture site, right? That we cover lots of things. We have different subsections. So there's TV, games, books, film, of course, wrestling, and did I say TV? I think I did. Yeah. So basically all these subsections, and I run the film section. So we have there's a bunch of editors and our editor in chief. Yeah. So that's a kind of like a side hustle. Like So when I'm not teaching, I am writing. So yep.
Very cool. Do you
Awesome.
have a favorite film this year so far?
This year.
Anything that comes? Yeah, this year. Anything that comes to mind? Something you recently covered?
I liked Good Luck to You, Leo Grande. I think it's coming out this week on Hulu. It stars Emma Thompson, Daryl McCormick. Yeah. It's
Very
basically
cool.
about this older woman who hires like a sex worker. Yes. I guess the premise sounds a bit sketchy, but it's actually really a really thoughtful film on like how we as a society like look at desire, look at sex, and aging and sex. I think is interesting. So and it's a mostly two-hander film, but it was really well done. And of course, I mean it's Emma Thompson, so she's always great. But he really kept up with her, so he was a surprising find. Yeah.
So it comes out soon on a Hulu?
Yeah, it's coming out this week, I think.
Awesome.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Glad to hear
that
it.
sounds good. That sounds very good. I think it dovetails into this film a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
right?
totally.
So what are we doing, Chris? Was this a mutual choice? I can't remember who chose this.
This was, the Chaser film, which we'll get to towards the end of the show. David Mamet's feature debut, House of Games, was your pick. But this one, I think I threw on our kind of draft, and it just stayed there because I feel like it's pretty canonical when it comes to not necessarily thrillers in general, but especially like political thrillers, spy thrillers, if you will. It's 1992's The Crying Game. As we are wont to do, I'll firstly read the logline and then ask you guys where your history with this film started and what it was like to either revisit it or if it was one of your or both of your first visits, whatever number it was, how it hit you in 2022. So IMDb, what a film to try to get a IMDb synopsis from.
Yeah, tough one.
Here it is. A British soldier kidnapped by IRA terrorists, their language, not mine, soon befriends one of his captors, who then becomes drawn into the soldier's world. A British soldier kidnapped by IRA terrorists soon befriends one of his captors, who then becomes... It's the same thing. It's double... It's a 2-line review synopsis on IMDb's site. So Good job, IMDb, for copy editing.
They kept it simple.
They're like, the sentence is so good, we have to say it twice.
Exactly. Yeah, drawn into the soldier's world. What a strange way to basically.
But it doesn't give anything away, though.
No, and that was the whole thing in '92, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Natasha, since you're our guest, why don't you start? Had you seen this film before? What's your history with it? Take it away.
I had not seen this film before.
Oh wow!
So the first, I think I heard of it, but I didn't really I've never watched it. So the first time was really prepping for the podcast. So I watched it. Was it? Yeah, I watched it like this week, basically, and then I rewatched some parts of it yesterday. Yeah, so this is my first interaction with the film. Yeah,
And you said you had heard of it. Like, did you know that I don't want to use the word twist because it's unfair to what actually occurs in the film. But I mean, what did you know going into it, other than like it was a relatively famous British film from the early '90s?
I try, usually when I go into a film, usually I try not to read anything about it.
Sure.
I guess depending on the film, because nowadays it's like you can't go anywhere without getting spoiled about something, right? You know, if you're on Twitter and any recent movie is going to get spoiled in some way if you're going to linger long enough. So generally I don't like to, so I tend to read about it after I've watched it. So I try to go in as a clean slate as possible. So I didn't know anything about it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
That's probably the best way to view it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because especially I feel like, I mean, I had never seen this before.
What?
Yeah. So I think it had a very different, I think in America growing up, because this movie was so successful here, that it was like, and I was like we were what, like 9 or 10 when it came out?
Yeah.
Something like that. So we're pretty young. But I knew all about it. Like I had heard it many, many times growing up. I knew the sort of reveal or sort of the mystery part of it, way before obviously I'd seen the film or I didn't even know it was about the IRA. I had no clue that it was about that whatsoever, or the political side to it. So yeah, to me, it was kind of like, oh, okay. Like I kind of knew the big marketing sort of gimmick reveal that they did, but I didn't know anything else about the film. So I forgot that Neil Jordan did it, who did Mona Lisa, which is a movie I just watched maybe.
Oh, that's right.
A few months ago, and was blown away by it because I'm doing this like noir rewatch thing or whatever. And I loved that movie. And this one, what came out, after that. But I was kind of like, wow, this is kind of a very, not necessarily what I expected based on hearing about it growing up for the last 30 years, right?
Yeah. I mean,
it's definitely hit different than I thought it was going to.
Sure. And especially I think that first act is gotta be surprising if you know the intrigue and the quote discourse that the film sparked, especially here in America and with the Academy Awards. And especially I think as to guys growing up in the 90s, my initial reference point for the film before I actually saw it was Ace Ventura.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah.
Sure.
That's how I probably first really realized about it. Yeah.
So are you familiar with that correlation, Natasha?
I think when I was reading up about it, that's what I saw. Yeah, but I think weirdly enough, I saw Ace Ventura first before I saw this movie. So I had no idea. Right? So I think generally, I guess, because we didn't really get it in Singapore, like it wasn't really known here. And I think when the film, when it came out, I was really young. I was like, 3 years old or something. It was not even, I think, locally. It wasn't like it depends, like, what suddenly comes onto the Singapore scene, but we don't really get a lot of films. And I think with that subject matter, right, we definitely wouldn't have gotten this film because of Yeah, I mean, we're quite a conservative society,
Yeah.
so, recently I think there's more, I think, acceptance, and, there are certain ratings now. So they've kind of expanded it. But I think back then, I'm pretty sure we didn't get the film here, which is why I think I never heard of it until you guys introduced it to me. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that makes a lot more sense now, knowing the context of. I think especially because America, and that's one of the big things we will likely get into in discussing the history of the film, and because it's unusual in that it's one of the few British films that had much more success across the
Yeah.
pond than it did in its home country. And I don't even, I mean, I read a lot about how largely that was because, especially in 92, was one of the more significant bombings by the IRA of a London pub or a British pub. I don't know if it was in London.
Yeah.
And it like literally happened one of the weekends that they were filming this movie.
Yeah.
And so it basically, got, I don't know, what do you call it? It's blacklisted without like anybody actually saying it's blacklisted. It just gets ignored.
Yeah.
But it does rev up Jordan's career stateside, and it also, I think, sparks more conversations about the IRA. But that also gets completely overshadowed by the fact, and we should say it straight out if you've managed to not be spoiled of what occurs about an hour and 4 minutes into the crying game, is the love interest, who is the former girlfriend or partner of a hostage British soldier, reveals to her new kind of love interest, Stephen Ray's character, who is the Irish terrorist, quote, that kidnapped Forrest Whitaker's character, falls in love with, and reveals that she has a penis. And that, of course, rocked the entire United States, because transness, barely had any vocabulary to go along with it at that time. In fact, transgender wasn't in the language. Instead, transsexual and transvestite was, which have since, been discarded, especially by the LGBTQIA community. So I think that if there's one thing, and this is kind of looping me back to explaining my history with the film, because I had seen Ace Ventura first as like a 12-year-old American boy. And then I think there was also kind of an allusion to the crying game in one of the later Naked Gun movies. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. 33
like
and a third.
Gun, 33 and a third. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, like, of course, I'm growing up with this like hyper masculine, homophobic, transphobic, suburban American lifestyle, which is definitely maybe not as conservative as, say, like growing up in Singapore, where this kind of stuff is blocked, but it's like not censored. And yet it's still very much like we're supposed to be, as the hegemony, as the cis straight white male, that this is unusual, right? That this is shocking. And it wasn't until like I started diving deeper. I had actually seen Neil Jordan's movie The Butcher Boy. Yeah, I grabbed it off of the shelf at Blockbuster. And this was so I've talked about this a little bit of like my discovery of like auteurism in my late teens, and then being like, oh, that was kind of a weird, interesting movie. I don't know if I liked it, but I want to find out about this director. And so then I found out that he had directed The Crying Game, which I had only known from references in these transphobic parodies. And then I watched it, and at least for me as like a young guy in America, it felt pretty eye-opening. It's very problematic looking back now in 2022. But I think for a lot of people, even as it spurred a lot more transphobia, because it just simply brought it out into the open, it also is, in some circles anyways, seen as like a kind of progressive marker, which ties into our whole existential aspect of thrillers, because it is kind of a weird film, because it's, on the one hand, like I mentioned earlier, a political thriller, and same thing, like IRA, like I probably still didn't know, like I barely knew what IRA because of the Devil's Own, that Brad Pitt Harrison Ford movie.
Oh yeah.
And was there an IRA plot in Blown Away as well, the Tommy Lee Jones movie?
Maybe
I might be misremembering that.
Yeah.
But anyways,
I think there was. Yeah.
It was tangential at best.
At best.
But then this got so overshadowed, and so like it. I have to say, even though it's kind of a mess of a movie, it was kind of important in like my upbringing, getting it, peering into that that part of the world, that part of that subculture that was very much still oppressed and discriminated against at the time.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think the thing that like stood out to me on the first watch here is I knew all that, and I had the same, let's call it's baggage. It's a lot of baggage because we grew up in the same city. And yeah, transphobic, homophobic, that was like every day was like that. And what the thing that blew me away with this is I was like, when the reveal is there, it doesn't really feel like a reveal to me.
No,
it just felt like a normal scene in a movie. And like, yeah, okay, it's a little bit, I guess, different than what we normally see in most films, but like, it didn't really seem like a. And also because we kind of grew up with the marketing for this movie too, and this thing was marketed in a very specific way about like there's this secret or something, and it was like I was watching it, was like, well, this is just kind of like not like a throwaway scene or anything like that, but like it wasn't as monumental or important as the sort of chatter and dialogue and discourse around the film made it seem to be.
Yeah,
because it's kind of just obviously an important part to what's going on, but there's so much more happening in this movie, and this is just another piece that kind of fits into it.
True.
I don't know if you feel that, like Tasha, did you kind of feel that way, or how did you feel about the movie in general? How did you receive it?
So basically, I started reading the notes that you guys prepared, and then I kind of stopped when I got to the part where the reception on the twist or something, right? There was that subsection, and I was like, oh crap! Like, oh no, I shouldn't be reading this, right? before the movie, right? So then I was like, okay, I won't read anymore. Then I went to watch it first. So but I know that basically a lot of the film was, when I was watching interviews after that with the cast, the first thing that they do would always be to kind of introduce the film with regard to like this how they say it, right? The phrasing is a twist, right? This reveal, right?
Exactly.
Which I think is kind of common for the time. I mean, like if you think of like M. Night Shyamalan's Sixth Sense, right? I mean, it's the same thing as a gimmick, right? It's like everyone wants to see it because it's like, what is this review, right, that we're gonna get in the movie. So I guess that's how it was. For me, I wasn't surprised. I kind of knew from the beginning. Yeah, but I mean I wasn't sure, so I think that was what made it interesting. I think that's what created the suspense. But I also didn't really, it wasn't really like a oh my god kind of thing, right? Because I think ultimately they're just people, right? So for me, I think it was more interesting to kind of see how Fergus would reveal his secret to do. Like that was the I was wondering how that was going to unfold more than the other one. So I mean I wasn't surprised, but I think because I suspected, that it kind of kept it did give it that kind of suspense, it did add it. So I think I was reading some reviews after that, right? And I think when they did some polling or something like that, I think some of the audience also suspected. So I think some of the critics' kind of feedback was that, because we know as much as Fergus, then, there isn't that suspense because, he doesn't know until midway, right? Compared to I think when they compared it to Vertigo, right? And, the idea is that Vertigo, we know more than Stewart's character, right? At some point, so then there's that suspense, right? But I think that audiences were polled, and I think I think they said like the numbers were like 20-30% actually kind of suspected. So it also I think helped to kind of create that suspense. But I think even if you didn't know, I don't think it mattered because I think the key secret would be, would Fergus reveal who he
Right.
is, right? So I think that kind of drove, I think, the suspense. It helped, keep us invested, I think, in the film's journey. So yeah, that was like how I felt watching it.
Yeah, like that's a really good point, that you have essentially the traditional like narrative where in the third act Fergus does reveal, that he was the one that held Jodie hostage and is at least somewhat, if not still very much responsible for his death. He and yet Yeah, I was also thinking that, especially in my rewatch, because I had, forgotten so much of it since I watched it in maybe like 98, 99, of the IRA hostage taking subplot. And yet, because of, like you said earlier, Dan, the baggage surrounding that, I still got kind of wrapped up. I listened to a couple podcasts that have already kind of dissected this film, and narratively, it is strange that it does come at the 1 hour and 4 minute mark, because then that, like you guys both mentioned, is like it becomes not as you know M. Night Shyamalan, right? It's
Yeah,
not. It's not. It's. I don't think twist or reveal is the correct terminology, at least narratively speaking, based on what we've watched all the way since Hitchcock and thought about traditionally what a twist or reveal is. But that was all the marketing, right? And even also in the reviews, I think that's an interesting tidbit, Natasha, that 20 to 30% figured it out before Fergus did. And especially in 2022, watching back, it's like, Fergus, take a look at what bar you keep coming to.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Like, why would that not stick out to him?
Yeah.
Like, I just like, what? How would you be that dense that you wouldn't pick
Like,
up
but
on
I
that? I mean,
kind
I'm
of
not.
like it though. Like, I
Yeah,
feel that he was just looking at the person, right?
Right.
yeah,
Like, I think he wasn't really very hung up on I guess where he was, right? So I guess the obsession element, right, that I think Jordan spoke about, right? Like, he wanted to create this
Mhm.
triangular moment of obsession, right? So
yeah.
he was just so fixated, and I think charmed by Dil, and attracted to Dil, I mean, yeah, I was as well, right? I think there's something so attractive about Dil, yeah. So I think that's what kind of also made it interesting. I think the film tried to kind of block out, I think, some segments of the bar. Like, it,
Yes.
it, it chose what to
Yeah.
show us as well. So it's like
Yes. Yeah.
after he finds out, then we see a different side to the bar.
Yeah.
So it's hinted at. I think Cole kind of mentions it. He nearly mentions it at one point to him, right? But then he gets interrupted and he doesn't continue. So that
Yeah.
all these elements, I think, kind of come together to create that suspense, right? That there's something about Dil that Fergus doesn't know, right? I mean, that's all we know and we kind of suspect. Yeah.
One thing that I came across in doing some research on this was, how this story came to be. Why did Neil Jordan pick this? And I thought it was he said something really fascinating in this BFI 25th anniversary interview.
Yeah.
That's up on YouTube. And he was basically like, the backstory here is like, this story's been told a few times before, specifically like the capturing of a soldier, holding him hostage, and then them basically building a friendship or camaraderie. And then that person, the captor has to kill that person. And then, then going back to the hometown and trying to reconnect with, in most cases, the wife. And Jordan had these ideas, he had these stories going around, and he said he basically kept writing the first third of the movie over and over again, and he couldn't get past when the main character goes back to London to meet the wife. And then he basically said, well, then I put a hairdresser in it, and she would be the wife. And then he goes, the breakthrough was when I made her a man, essentially, is what he says. And then he wrote the script in 3 weeks after that point. I found that to be very fascinating, because as we're talking about this movie, we're making that part of it, the transness of that character, not important. It doesn't seem like it's important to us that much. But like to Neil Jordan, it seemed like that was his creative spark here.
Right.
What do you guys make of that? Is that because I that's where the movie starts to become a little bit problematic on some level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is really heightening that otherness of Dill on some level, but at the same time not. He's like really walking on a tightrope with it. And yeah, he's building suspense. He's making it a reveal. And nowadays it probably hits a little bit different because we're more used to it. But I don't know. What do you guys? Is he like playing with fire and sort of the way that he builds that suspense about Dill?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a brazenness to Jordan, and that's kind of been both his uh, attractive quality as well as, you know, his destructive quality throughout his career, because he's made some really interesting movies like The Crying Game and The Butcher Boy, and Mona Lisa, but he's also made some like really big stinkers. Like it fell apart in his most recent movie Greta, which had a fantastic cast and interesting premise and just like was complete trash. And then he also did it in the late 90s with Annette Bening and In Dreams. He's just kind of he's the type of filmmaker to not worry about being careful. And that's, you know, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I got, especially upon rewatching. And even like, you know, he did a lot of press not only at the time of the release, but also in these anniversary pieces for the film, also in the late 90s when it was selected as for the BFI best British films of all time. And he there's a kind of fascinating but also cringeworthy interview he did with Queerty about the anniversary of The Crying Game and also the anniversary of Interview with the Vampire, which has, you know, arguably become even a bigger touchstone for the LGBTQIA community in its legacy. And he also, in that interview, mentions another LGBTQIA character that he created, or that he adapted actually from a novel. Cillian Murphy played this character in Breakfast on Pluto. And he like kind of pries at the interviewer who very clearly identifies themselves as queer early on in the interview. And it's almost like he's got this kind of like Fergus, this kind of obsession, this kind of dangerous intrigue that comes off as borderline offensive, even in 2017 for its 25th anniversary. So I feel like he, you know, the whole, whatever the idiom is, the dog hasn't changed his stripes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think listening to him speak about it, I think he spoke about how I think a lot of the filmmaking at the time was very, I think, stagnant. Like, I think he felt like it wasn't doing anything, or it wasn't challenging anything, or it wasn't really exploring anything. So I think maybe I think that's the kind of intention, I think, to spark, I think, some kind of conversation, you know, beyond just, I guess, the mind numbing experience of just, you know, sitting down and escaping with the movie, right? Like, you know, can a movie make you think beyond, I guess, that experience? You know, I mean, after I watched it, I couldn't stop thinking about it, because I couldn't
Mhm.
quite pin down how I felt about it. I felt really ambivalent, right? You know, because on one hand, you know, I think rewatching it gives it such a new lens, you know, because I went back to
Sure.
rewatch some of the earlier scenes, right, where he was, you know, with they were having some kind of flirtation, right, you know. So
Yeah.
and when I first watched it, I sensed the flirtation, but I didn't know if I was overreading it, or, you know, or if Jodie was just kind of using that as a way to kind of, you know, convince his captor to release him, right? So I
Yeah.
wasn't sure what to make of that banter. You know, was it flirting? What was it? I had no idea, right? You know, so I thought that it could just be a way for Jody to kind of, you know, let his captor, like, let his guard down in a sense, right? You know, get to know the man, and, you know, he won't see you as a prisoner anymore. You know, so but then when I went back to rewatch it, you know, there are things that Jody says that
Mhm.
makes it so interesting, because he says, like, you know, let me let me read what I wrote. He actually says, when he shows the photograph to Fergus, he actually says that she wouldn't suit you, And he's like, why not, and there's a lot of discussion about this, right? And at that point, you just kind of think that, you know he's just talking mainly, just as, yeah, I mean, she's not your type, right? Yeah, but then after that, when we go into the, into deeper into the film, we realize, oh, there's a lot of this conversation where Jodie is operating on, like somewhere else, right, compared to where Fergus was, right, in the conversation. So that was quite interesting to me. I think rewatching it, I think, makes it richer in some way, I guess. The writing, yeah. So that was what was interesting for me.
Absolutely. There's
Yeah.
one piece of analysis that really stood out to me looking back on the film. And I mean, at the time, I feel like that whole aspect was lost, the homoeroticism between Jodie and Fergus. Like, even though Jordan is like, it's not even subtext, it's basically text.
Are you talking about that particular scene?
Yes, when Jodie is asking him for help. Yeah. And it's also like you said earlier about the bar scene, everything's very deliberately framed. He's not necessarily like a expert compositional filmmaker, but he like knows it's symbolism to the point of absurdity. Like the cold open clip with the goldfish. Like he does not shy away from having fun with even a scene where there's an IRA soldier and a British soldier that are in a life or death stakes situation. If the shot is framed so that Fergus literally has to hold Jodie's penis to help him pee in a way and like hold his hand so he leans forward, it looks very similar to how it would be if they were having anal sex, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's definitely intentional, right?
Yeah. That was an observation, by the way, to give credit. Sierra Maloney from The Sunday has a great retrospective piece on The Crying Game.
It's funny
because he says it's just meat.
Yeah,
exactly.
I was like, oh.
And that's also kind of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the viewer. I feel like even if it's subconscious about the reveal later with Dill's character is like everybody made such a big deal about this, but like it's just
Jordan's very cheeky.
Yeah,
like, he knows what he's doing. It's funny you guys were bringing this up because I love going back to like right when the film came out and looking at interviews.
Yes.
It's just so fascinating to see before this movie got famous because I was looking at the run of this film. Obviously, in the UK, I think it came out in the fall of '92, did basically very little. In Ireland, didn't do much at all. But then over here, Miramax picks it up. And, Miramax is pretty famous for kind of bringing indie house movies to the mainstream. And this is one of the sort of paradigms of that. But it's great to see interviews before it got famous. And Neil Jordan did one in January of 1993. And they tend to be way more open about what they were doing and their intentions than like after it becomes famous because they become a little bit like closed off.
Right.
To that, exactly, Natasha, what you're saying, he says in this interview, I structured the script so that everything that happens in the second part is a mirror image of what happened in the first part. If Fergus had been emotionally brave enough in the first encounter, he could have saved Jodie's life. Fergus is confronted with the situation in the second encounter where he actually has to protect this woman. So he literally he mirrored it exactly kind of, to that first part. And that's not something that when I first watched it, I did not, I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on most of that. I just thought it was kind of, genre work type stuff, like create like a conflict, create guns, blood, violence, and then I'm gonna like add a lot of subtext to it. But I think it's way more clever than that. And in those scenes you can definitely tell it like you said, Chris, it is text, but it's also kind of wrapped within genre conventions. Right. And so it's like that's what I love when movies do that. That's like one of my favorite things, when you make a really great genre work, but you stuff it with stuff. You stuff it with things that you can deconstruct and pull apart, and the more you pull it apart, the more you find. And this definitely feels like one of those movies.
I mean, I think what helped, in the reading, right? And I think it's so interesting what he did is that, in like the dreams, I think that he has of Jodie, prior, I think, to meeting Dil, and after, he meets Dil. He imagines, or he has this dream of Jodie in like his cricket attire, right? And he's like showing like the cricket thing. I don't know what it's called, but that's that thing, right? And I found it so interesting because initially when I first watched it, I read it as guilt. I read it as that his guilt, right, in letting Jodie die, right? But after like a certain point when I went and rewatch it, I was thinking that it could also be viewed as desire, right? Because he was looking at Jodie basically at this like peak of virility, right? Like he wasn't seeing him the way he was towards the end of his life, right? The begging, or so that would be more guilt, right? He was looking at him basically at like peak virility, right? Him doing a sport, and that's what kept going on in his mind, right? And I think when Dil was giving him a blowjob as well, right? That was the thing that was playing in his mind. Yeah. So, so I thought that's I think that was one of the very interesting things about the film, that ability to kind of give it such a make it such a rewarding second rewatch. I think a lot of times very few films can do that. I think that you gain so much from watching it again, and seeing everything in new light, with new eyes, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's for me, because I know way more about the IRA and about being
You weren't an IRA expert before this movie, Chris?
No, but I am hooked. There's a podcast called The Troubles, and it's like 32 episodes.
Oh my God.
I'm already 3 down. Anyways, that mirroring that, like you mentioned earlier, Dan, and also kind of goes hand in hand with what you're saying, Natasha, and the concept of desire and like being like wanting another human for like who they are rather than like their categorization or their identity. It plays really well, even if it is still problematic and messy, because I do want to like make note that the film, as I mentioned earlier, for some people it's seen as progressive, and for some other people, including a lot of trans people, it's kind of a sore spot. The director of the Netflix documentary Disclosure, which goes over the history of transness in cinema, Sam Feder, he spoke last year more in depth. He mentions the cryogame briefly in the film, but specifically this idea of the image of the protagonist seeing the penis and then immediately vomiting, right?
Oh yeah.
And that arguably also kind of plays against this whole, what I think is pretty laid out, like you said, Natasha, like he's not just coming to a realization that Dil has a penis, but coming to the realization that he's queer, right? And that he has these desires, and they don't line up with his identity as it's probably been, hammered into him as like, assumedly Irish Catholic dude.
That's a lot of layers right there.
Exactly. So then like that's why I think ultimately, even though it does feel kind of messy and is certainly problematic in retrospect, that layering and that mirroring really does work. And you wouldn't expect it to, which makes sense. It goes back to what you were saying, Dan, about Jordan kind of having that spark of realizing that he wanted to make that part of Dil's character, because then it does. It's like this diptych, kind of like, Full Metal Jacket or the triptych of Moonlight, where it's like you get to see our protagonist change subtly, but he doesn't necessarily, it's never outwardly open. It's not like he's having a conversation with Dil and he's like, oh, you're human, just like Jodie turned out to be, like, like you would especially like you would today with like a trite Oscar bait type film.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, because it's like the ending of the film, he's in prison and like they're separated by glass, and in the same interview where you talked about mirroring, he goes, I leave him in a glass cage. Right? In my mind, it's a perfect marriage. Love is something quite different from sexuality. Sexuality has everything to do with love, but love does not necessarily have anything to do with sexuality. I want him to make a love story that actually came out of circumstance itself. For Fergus to be a lover, he has to be making a choice that is beyond his sexual issues. Whether their relationship becomes sexual, I guess the audience has to decide that. Which is just like, that's just like, wow. That's a lot to unpack just from that statement.
Yeah.
But I think that the opening of it, I leave him in a glass cage like that. Like, there's this separation at the end with his
Yeah.
character where he feels he's still divided or something inside. You know,
Yeah.
it's almost like he hasn't fully. He saves her and takes the rap for her and goes to prison, right? But there's still, it's not the happy ending, right?
Right.
Yeah. Because I think when it comes to identity, right, sometimes, we subsume ourselves into all these categories, right, that it's difficult, I think, to see yourself without them. Who am
Yeah.
I outside of these things that I have come to see myself as part of for so long? It's
Yeah.
difficult, right? I think, so even though he recognizes that he loves this person, I think there is a difficulty, I think, to see himself, I think, apart from, I guess, even the political affiliations that he's been a part of for so long. I think what's interesting is that, even though this is a political thriller, I think the idea is that, by the end of it, Fergus prioritizes personal relationships over these kind of broader characterizations, right? By taking the rep,
Yeah.
by, choosing to save Dale, compared to his inaction with Jodie, right? I think kind of shows that. So I think for me that was the strength of it. The idea of how the looking part of that characterizations, and then being able to kind of prioritize the personal, over all these other things. I think that's sometimes we lose sight of that, isn't it? Like we tend to, we can
Yeah.
prioritize so much things that are bigger outside of ourselves for so long that it's it's difficult, I think, to kind of size down and then choose something else. So yeah, because I think I had this discussion with my husband after I watched it, right? And I was kind of saying, does he really sometimes make a choice, right? Because sometimes the circumstances make a choice for him.
Yeah.
So we were having this kind of little debate about that, but then my husband said sometimes the circumstances choose for you. So that was also interesting, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's, he also, like, I kind of got stuck on it at the beginning of the second act that, like, he doesn't just, like, go for a weekend to London, right, to, like, fulfill his honor to Jodie and watch over Dill, but, like, he legit, like, separates himself completely from the IRA and lives now in the land of the people that, oppressed and colonized and, like, imperialistically oppressed his people. And now you're getting this new version of that playing out, but with the queer community. And the other aspect that we haven't even mentioned yet is, I mean, there's a lot we hadn't had time to touch on, but, like, this is also very much on the tail end of the AIDS crisis in the Western world, right? And it's very, like, throwaway, like, clearly Jordan didn't do his research, or, like, he wanted Dill to, like, be kind of lying or speaking in half truths towards the end when it's revealed that Dill's on medication. And whether, and what is the term that she uses, like blood condition or something.
Oh yeah.
Is this on
okay.
me?
Right? Yeah.
Oh.
At first she says blood condition, and then he asks what's it called, and she says ennui.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that at all. Yeah.
That totally flew over my head. Wow.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like a bizarre, like, kind of word salad dialogue closing up with the addition of the convoluted, judge attempted assassination.
Oh my god! I mean, yeah, when that Peter guy like ran into the street and just,
Yeah.
I was just like, what? Like,
Yeah.
dude,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I
Not
don't
the
know.
greatest
Like, that was.
action director, I don't think.
No,
Right?
no, no.
Not doesn't really not.
I mean,
Yeah.
there were some very 90s things happening, like the
Yes.
explosions,
Yes.
even Jodie's death, I thought was like,
Oh my god. The tank.
what?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
was like, oh my goodness, yeah. So, I mean, it shocked me. It was shocking, but
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, sometimes, I mean, I guess it's a very 90s thing, like bordering on melodrama sometimes, and
Yes.
Yeah.
the hyperbole, right? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The thing, I mean, do you guys, when you watched it, does it seem like an indie movie to you? I mean, the thing that blows me away about this,
Oh yeah.
it was basically what, $4 million budget to do this, and like
Yeah.
they had to cobble money together as they were filming it because no one would back the movie.
Yeah. I mean, Jordan was
That's just, like,
directing theater at night and like had allegations of literally like stealing the cash from the cash register at the theater
Oh Lord.
to buy props and stuff for the Crying Game.
But it doesn't, I don't know, like to me when I saw it, I would not, it definitely feels like a Miramax indie movie without a doubt.
Yeah.
It has that type of
Yeah.
feel.
Yes.
But there's like the craftsmanship with it was very tight, like across the board. And I was like, this does not feel like a movie that was cobbled together with like stolen money from,
No.
petty cash. You know what I mean? Like it has a sense of accomplishment and polish to it that I thought was very surprising.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially when you look at the budget and like, I didn't know it performed that well either. I just thought it was a smaller movie that like had a lot of cachet because of, this, reveal or secret or whatever. But no, it was incredibly successful here, at least in the United States. The rest of the world, it didn't really do much, but in the United States, it did like 62 million, which translates to about $138 million at the box office. That's insane.
I think it was the actors as well. I mean, I think at that point, Jaye Davidson was like unknown, right? He was like
Totally unknown. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Like even Stephen Rea was a surprising, I think, protagonist, but
Yeah.
I think he was so compelling to watch. I don't know what it is about him. Yeah, I mean, there is something very attractive about him. I don't know.
Well, he's
Yeah,
very good being
so
silent, right? Just kind of
yeah,
moving through the scene. There's something compelling about him.
like you could. I mean, a lot of the time he's not really like doing much. I mean, like, but
Yeah.
the flirting part, the flirting part, right? I think when they joke about it, and then Jodie's like, I know that was very difficult for you to do, right? And he's like, oh, the pleasure's all mine, right? And I mean, I don't know, the way he delivered it, it was just like kind of sexy, but like
Yeah,
weird.
yeah.
I don't know. He made me question myself.
I love it.
Yeah, there's something very compelling about him, and his silence. Yeah, so it's a
Right.
very interesting choice, I think. Yeah.
And we should mention, especially because I did kind of a teaser tweet about this, that it was probably like Stephen Ray's bringing a lot of his own personal baggage to this role, since his wife at the time, who he divorced in
Yeah.
2003, but he was married to an IRA soldier. He, explicitly said in public, including in press to even like Entertainment Weekly in the 90s, that he did not share the same political views as his wife. But that's got to be kind of daunting to kind of take on this role that not only has this, big scene where your love interest reveals to have different genitalia than you'd expect, and like having these homoerotic moments with Forrest Whitaker, but also like playing an IRA soldier when you know how the world largely feels about the IRA, and yet it's right there at home when you get in bed at night. So I think that it reminds me a bit, actually. We'll talk in a later episode this season about Roy Scheider's performance in Sorcerer.
Yes.
A lot of silence, a lot of big sad eyes, and even though the character is not necessarily drawn as well as maybe I would have liked, he does a lot with it, and so I understand why Jordan keeps coming back to Stephen Ray, and it's impressive.
But I think there's like the whole like there's a rawness to this movie underneath it all.
Mhm.
That just it's just like it's very kinetic. The whole thing. It's like you could tell that like, despite the fact that it was well shot and well edited, all that kind of stuff, there is like his performance and all the performances. There's just
Yeah.
there's a raw aggression to the whole thing that like I don't know how we're making this movie, but we're making it. You know,
Right,
and you can
right.
kind of feel it as an undercurrent to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to our chaser film? You guys ready to do that? You guys want to talk about House of Games, the 1987 David Mamet film, which I had never seen before, but I selected.
Amazing.
I feel like you guys are taking me on some like journey, right? Because I didn't watch like both films. So I feel like such a, I don't know. Yeah.
It's we like to have fun on this show. We like to stretch ourselves a bit.
So
Chris,
where did you pick this from? No, I've before he became a MAGA idiot, cancel culture. David Mamet was.
I didn't know he became a MAGA Trumper.
God, yeah. He's like a prime, interview subject on Breitbart.
Gross. That's so bad. What?
He's not a good man.
No.
Oh no. Okay.
But I was very much like speaking of obsession, I was borderline obsessed with Mamet movies.
Yeah.
Especially as a young guy that like gets impressed by like twisty scripts and big male mean energy.
Yeah, right.
and like so I had known that it was his debut, but I had just like I don't know. I didn't actually realize until I watched it and then did research know how like canonical it had essentially become. Like not only does it have its own Criterion release, but a lot of people like look to it as Mamet's best film and as like one of the key introductions of like both the protagonist and the audience being pulled in through a series of cons, which is a recurring theme in a lot of his movies.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was very excited that you had thrown this on the list because I had always wanted to see it, but didn't realize how much cachet it has had over the years, especially in recent years. I think perhaps before Mamet came out. I think what sparked him to like start becoming more aggressively and vocally right wing was the quote cancellation of Harvey Weinstein, which is interesting because we just talked about a Miramax movie. And,
it's all connected.
Okay.
I don't know where had you. So this was first watch for all of us. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah, I was, and I'd never heard of it before. The reason I selected it as because our theme is existential thrillers, and that's kind of specific, right? There's a lot of thrillers out there, but there's not a lot that are like super cerebral and like play with your expectations, play with the protagonist's like mindset and perspective. And I'm glad that I picked it because it feels like a really good example of an existential thriller. I was blown away by it. I thought it was phenomenal. I don't know what do you guys think?
I really enjoyed it. I think if we think about the Crying Game, I think I'm a bit more ambivalent on whether I like it or not. Or I think it's a good film, but I don't know where I stand. I think I'm a bit ambivalent because some parts are problematic or make me think. So, but I think this one I was drawn in immediately. It was I love the vibe, the atmosphere. I don't know. I even like the way that is it Lindsay Krause, like the way that she delivered the lines. I know she gets a lot of. When I was reading about it in like some Reddit threads, right? I think some people were kind of not very complimentary about her performance. I think the way she delivered the lines and I think the monotony of it, but I don't know. I really liked it. I think it helped me, I guess the audience, identify with her in some ways. She feels so much like a blank slate, but at the same time, so very readable in a lot of ways as well. So I was pulled in. I mean, I felt like I was in even though, like, at some, I feel like the way the movie is structured is that it allows you to be a few steps ahead of the con. Like,
Yes.
you realize that it's happening while it's happening, but at the same time, you can't help but be fascinated on, where this is all going. So I thought that was like the best part about it. Like, that it's happening, but you still want to kind of know what how it ends, right? Or
Yeah.
what happens in the duration. So yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think, yeah, it was paced really well as well. Yeah,
yeah, like super tight on the pacing. And yeah, it's one of those, I don't know. In the same way I knew I was being conned, right? But
yeah,
like her,
Mhm.
like the protagonist, like you're in on it. You want that thrill. You
yeah,
want to see how it plays out. What I didn't expect was the ending, which I felt like the entire movie was pulling me in, making me a part of the con, just like she was with the group. And at the end, I felt like I was conned. I felt like Mamet conned me. It, like, did the old switcheroo with the character at the end, where I was like, wait, what? I don't even because the entire time I was watching it, I was viewing her kind of as the victim, right?
yes,
And then
yes,
at the end, it's just
yes,
like it's like this swap, and it's very sudden. And I was like, oh, that's his point all along. He's stringing us along, you know. He's Mike at the billiards house or whatever, like picking up people, picking up cons, doing short cons. Like Mamet's doing that to us.
Mhm.
yeah.
I don't know, Chris, what do you think about this? As a Mamet disciple? Or I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, no,
Sorry, I didn't mean that.
I think there are parts of the film that are just like, I think, objectively great.
Yeah.
But what I kind of stray from more, and I certainly like, this would have been right in my wheelhouse when I got obsessed with like Glengarry Glen Ross and Spanish Prisoner, and even like up to Red Belt, which I, at least when it came out, was my favorite film of the year and my favorite Mamet film so far. State and Maine is also fantastic, more on the comedy side of things. But there's something, I have to admit, there's something that just like rubbed me the wrong way, especially
What was
at the
it?
culmination of the film. And there's two aspects to it. One, which I think is just which is unintentional and maybe just like a reading that I have to wrestle with, and another one which I think is just kind of unfortunate. I'll start with the first. The first, which is more forgivable, but still just like made me kind of frustrated. And we mentioned Shyamalan earlier, and he kind of did this similarly in both Split and Glass. It's like there's a very unfortunate read on like the psychiatry as a profession, I feel like, in this movie.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't like it. And you could very much make a fair argument that it's not the profession at whole. Like, it's this character, especially when you look at how the ending plays out, and she's kind of just becoming who she's meant to be all along. But I feel like, especially knowing how Mamet has swung politically over the years, he feels like, and this is kind of ties into the second prong of it for me, where the movie doesn't totally work, is like he feels very entrenched in this like mannered and stoic, and like you should be able to, like, he wants to be, he's playing God with his characters all the time through all these cons, and he thinks that we should be able to like stand on our own two legs too. And on the one hand, like, that's admirable and it's narratively impressive. I also should make sure to note that Ricky Jay, who plays one of the con men and became like essentially Mamet's right hand man over the years, is known for very much never taking a writing credit, despite the fact that as like a professional magician, literally, throughout his acting career, it comes up with almost all of the actual cons in the Mamet movies. To the point where like Mamet had attempted to write a con for just like the example bit where they're like on the street eating hot dogs and letting Lindsay Grouse's character get like fake embedded into the world of con men, and it was like a secret of the trade that Jaye had told Mamet, and then like on set, Jay's like, by the way, we can't do that. I'll come up with something else. That's improvised. Like his whole bit with the envelope and the dollar.
Yeah.
Like the dollar was supposed to be a prop for another con that they were going to reveal, but Jaye, wanting to be true to the secrets and code of the trade of magicians and con men and illusionists, just came up with that whole thing on the spot. So there's part of the impressiveness of this script, I think, that we owe a lot to Jaye. Doesn't take away from the fact that the film's very impressive in many other ways. But okay, last point. How do we, just based off this movie, and you can, if you've got other Mamet scripts to fall back on or to boost up your point of view, how do we feel like Mamet feels about women?
Not good, I don't think. Right?
No, I don't. I mean, okay, you guys say first.
I just say that because I was very put off by how much the words broad and bitch are used throughout this movie.
Yeah. But I mean, the men are very particular kind of men, right?
Sure.
You know. I mean, even in the Crying Game, I felt like the language was quite loaded as well.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, I guess for me, I think watching it, right, I think ultimately, I think it was easy for us to kind of view as a victim, because I think, I mean, the gender kind of allowed that to happen, right? I mean, we were supposed to kind of see her as this victim to this, gang of men, right, who are, con men, right? But I think what was interesting is that for most of the film, we know who they are. The con men are con men. They stay the same, right? They don't change. They've never pretended to be anything else but that, right? But I think for her, what was interesting is that there are these layers to her that we're not privy to, right? Because we are so used to kind of seeing her in this role where she falls for things, and I think that's also sides of herself that she's kind of repressed. So I mean, I don't think that she's like, oh, this dodgy person at the end, where she's like, I think the idea is that a lot of life, I think, is driven by impulse and control, right? And I think it's how we manage the in between, right? So I think for her, she's kind of put herself into this box, right? I think she's kind of deprived herself of a life of being driven by these kind of things, right? Because she wrote a book about it, right? She know how it works, right? She's seen people who get addicted, who become driven, by their impulses, right? So she's kind of removed herself from all of that, right? Only to kind of see that in doing so, she's kind of, become, when your life is devoid of thrills, of anything that you can kind of impulsively do, I guess then you become more prone to addiction, right? And so I think the ending kind of revealed, so there's like revelation and a movement away, I think, about I mean the shooting's not great, but I think the idea here is that we get to see, I think, more than we bargain for. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, I think that women can be villains in a piece, or they can have more layers than I mean, it was not where I expected it was going. Yeah, I thought she was gonna like swap the bags. That's where my mind was. I was like, oh, she's gonna, like, that's what she was trying to do, right? But that was not her end game at all. So that was interesting. Yeah.
I mean, she comes out on top, right? She's the winner at the end.
In a way.
To paraphrase Beyonce.
in this cinematic universe, she's gonna get away with it. She's not gonna get caught. And she kind of gets to continue her way of life. She got to dabble in that world. What I don't really understand is where her character is going to go, which is sort of like, but at the same time, there's sort of like she's victorious, right? It feels like to me when I see
I
it.
mean, the wardrobe change is significant, right? It's deliberate, right? I think the idea
Yeah.
is that
Yeah, that's
she's
true.
allowing color into her life.
Yes.
Before she's always wearing this kind of structured suits. It's very gray, very typical, right? So I think ultimately she was living a life devoid of like pleasure and thrill.
Yeah.
And I think embarking on this, I think allowed her, I think, to kind of embrace that side of herself that yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's very relatable, I guess, as a woman, right? Because I think the further you progress in life, right, I think you're taught to kind of embrace these roles, like as mother, yeah, I mean, for me as well, like as a teacher, right, there are certain things you kind of have to embrace when you take on these roles, right? And a lot of it has to do, I think, with repressing or holding back certain kind of things
Yeah.
about yourself as well, right? You can't be a certain way, so I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I feel like she's giving herself permission to live live a little, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
I
not very
kind of wondered.
moral, but
Yeah. Well, I think it's
yeah, I
interesting. Like
mean,
if she was swapped out for a man, and the exact same sort of scenario happened, would the ending would feel? I don't know if the ending would feel. I don't know how the ending would feel. Is it
Yeah,
like? Is it? I don't know, because it feels like, oh, did she get away with it? Is she victorious, or is Mamet saying that she's just kind of an evil person? You know what I mean? Like, I don't
well,
know.
it's
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 so like,
interesting because I mean, Lindsay Krause was literally his wife at the time,
oh, Jesus.
and I mean, you look at the rest of his filmography, and there's nary female protagonist to be found
Yeah.
outside of this one. So it is. It's like, on the one hand, I can totally read it as like, oh, this is a fun twist on the idea of the femme fatale, right? And yet it's still like, I don't know. I did not. I didn't. I felt more disenchanted when the credits were rolling than perhaps like in the first act, like when the water gun bit on the poker table is like, oh, I'm so in on this movie,
Yeah.
and it just, I don't know, but like I don't think like that's the thing about Mammoth movies, and I feel the same way with certain ones like Heist,
Yeah.
where it's like incredible cast, very fun premise, and playing with audience and character expectations, and then it's like he has a very disheartening view of the world in general,
Yeah.
and
He's
so
very cynical.
Yeah.
you're made to like feel frustrated at the end. And
But I
if
think for some reason it works for me because this definitely feels like pure genre work, where he's not trying to do anything more than make a really kind of fun, interesting heist movie
yeah,
with a lot of twists and turns. Like, he's not stretching for anything. Obviously, he's a wonderful writer, and the dialogue is fantastic. But he never, from a narrative perspective, he never breaks outside thriller. Like, he has no interest in doing that. To
yeah,
me, it's almost like it felt like a game. And I felt like I was in on it, and then he surprised me at the end. I was like, oh, this is a great experience. Right. But I don't take anything, like, there's the content in Crying Game, to me, is going to stay with me for a long time. Nothing's going to stay with me with House of Game. Like, it's just not. Like, it's like
Okay.
a really cool cinematic movie, but like, it doesn't have the same effect to me personally.
Wait, could I add something about
Yeah.
I think her character? I think what really fascinates me about it is that I think a lot of times, I think when we think about women and womanhood in general, right? Women are kind of always kind of put into this dichotomy, right, of like saint or sinner, right? So it's like either you're the yeah, so the woman on the pedestal, or the fallen woman below, right?
Yeah.
And I think what is interesting is that sometimes, a lot of the time, there is this desire to be very apologetic, I think. Very difficult to forgive yourself, which is the whole idea that he kind of embarks on, right? and we see that that's what her client in jail is also kind of dealing with, right? That difficulty, I think, in forgiving yourself, that burden, I think, that you carry, right? I think I was watching this recent film, I think came out this year or last year, end of last year, The Lost Daughter, with
Yeah.
Olivia
Yeah.
Colman, right? And I think it deals with it in a very similar way, right? I think women, I mean, I don't know, like, we are very kind of we build ourselves into these roles that we feel that we need to take on, right? So she is just responsible. I mean, definitely something happened in her when in her younger years with her father and all that, right? So there's this like saintly image she's tied herself to, right? And that feeling, at the end when she thinks about what she possibly did, right? She feels so tormented by guilt, so apologetic, right? But when we see the men, right, in contrast, they don't feel
Yeah.
anything about what they've done to her, right? They are the opposite, of what they have put her through, right? And I think that was what kind of made me kind of like the ending. I mean, I don't like that she murdered him, but I think the idea of forgiving yourself, being able to kind of move past that, I think was interesting, I think, for me as a woman. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely I mean, just for the craftsmanship alone and like the pacing and the writing, the acting, it's absolutely worth seeing. I mean, obviously they're both worth seeing. Do we have any? We got to close this thing down. Any
Yes.
closing comparisons, closing thoughts that we have about House of Games and the Crank? What do you guys think?
I'll go first, so you can have the last word, Natasha, as our guest. I will say that there is kind of a bagginess and like casual aspect to both of these films, and yet, like we've also mentioned, they have really deliberate viewpoints that are like borderline problematic in retrospect, but also really just like undeniably like provocative, which is part and parcel of why we've done an episode that lasts longer than an hour for the first time in a while. Like this is also just a messy time in the world, so it makes sense that identity is at the top of everybody's thoughts, like how Reagan was operating in the 80s and George Bush the first in the early 90s, at least in America. There's this really kind of strong outburst. I had to look and find out when Mamet switched, because he was very notably liberal in
Yeah, he was.
the 80s and 90s, both in the theater world and the film industry. It was 2008. He did an essay for The Village Voice titled "Why I'm No Longer a Brain Dead Liberal."
Oh,
Gross.
And which is,
what a title. Yeah.
yeah, which is interestingly the year that Barack Obama is elected.
Yeah, I don't
So-
like that. That's not good.
No,
I don't like that.
yeah. So like they're both very messy, problematic filmmakers making very entertaining and provocative films, for better or worse.
Natasha, any closing thoughts you have about Crime Game or House of Game?
I think it's interesting. What's interesting is how both films, I think, revolve a lot around desire. I think what we allow ourselves to feel versus what we kind of hold ourselves from feeling, right? So I think both really really kind of pivot around that, right? And I think outside, I think, of this idea of like identity, what we identify with, affiliations, categories, right? I think ultimately being human comes down to, a lot of it comes down to desire, right? What I will allow myself to feel, and what I give myself, I think, agency to do, or to pursue, right? So so I think for the Crying Game, it's restraint and then permission and then perhaps some restraint, right? Whereas for, I think, House of Games, it's restraint and then permission, and then
a
I
lot of
guess
permission.
yeah. And I mean, I think she's got to cage some of that at the end, right? I don't think she can go around just, willy-nilly, but so I think ultimately it just comes to what we allow ourselves to kind of pursue. So I think that for me made it very interesting, both films to watch. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on the show.
Yes, thank you so much,
guest.
Natasha.
Oh my god, thank you. I had so much fun. I love like talking about film, and especially speaking with you guys about it. And it's fun to speak with people who love film and I think know so much about it, or read up so much about it. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, absolutely. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.